Tonight, President Trump delivers his first State of the Union address of his second term in front of his largest audience ahead of the midterm elections. Joining us to discuss is U.S. Senate candidate from North Carolina and former Republican National Committee Chair, Michael Watley. Good morning to you, sir. Good to see you. President Trump hoping to really use the State of the Union to give the GOP an edge heading into the midterm. So how best do you think he can accomplish that? What are you hoping to hear as a U.S. Senate candidate?
President Trump right now is leading the most transformative term, presidential term in our lifetime. He has really, truly started to rebuild our economy. He's restored our borders and keeping our kids and our communities safe. And he's also making sure that America is strong and respected again around the world. What he needs to do tonight is make sure that he communicates clearly the actions that he's taking are having significant benefits for the American people.
Big part of the president's speech, as it is with every speech of every president, is going to be about the economy. He will undoubtedly highlight the administration's economic wins we've seen wages increasing, unemployment rate going down. We've seen prices go down like gas and energy, while, yes, there has been some increase, obviously, in wages. How does he talk about this, though, without dismissing concerns that some voters still have?
Yeah, look, President Biden left America and our economy in a ditch. And right now, President Trump is working 24/7 every day to make sure that he gets us out of the ditch. The Republicans in House and Senate have passed the One Big Beautiful Bill. We're starting to see the impact that's going to have on tax returns over the course of the year. President needs to talk about his tax policies, his trade policies, his regulatory policies, and how they're going to benefit the American economy by creating jobs and raising wages and bringing down prices.
This is going to be the first time also President Trump faces Supreme Court justices following their controversial ruling on his tariff policies. So what do you think? Does he call them out directly, or does he focus on the benefits the tariffs have had up to this point, or both?
Well, what the president wants to do is make sure that we have an international trade regime that is going to work for America. The Supreme Court ruling is what it is. The president is going to find other avenues to make sure that we have trade policies that are going to help our manufacturers, our small businesses, and our farmers.
We know some Democratic lawmakers plan to boycott. They plan to not show up at all and hold their own address, so to speak. And there are also some who could perhaps try to disrupt the president's speech, like we saw with Congressman Al Green. Virginia Governor Abigail Spanberger, meantime, will give the rebuttal to President Trump's State of the Union address. So what do you think about this pick of Spanberger? Does that tell you where the Democratic Party is headed?
Well, look, I think the pick of Abigail Spanberger to supply the rebuttal tonight really sends two signals. The first is that the Democrats know that they cannot win on their agenda. They have absolutely doubled down on the same failed agenda that they ran on in 2024, open borders, inflationary spending, high taxes, a weak, woke America. And Abigail Spanberger is the standard bearer for that policy right now. She also did not run on those issues. We know that the Democrats' agenda is not popular with the American people, so she ran on being a moderate. Joe Biden ran on being a moderate. Kamala Harris tried to be a moderate, and then they ruled from the left, right? My opponent, Roy Cooper, ran two different races for governor, saying that he was a moderate and then ruled as a leftist. He is trying to do the same thing right now. The Democratic Party understands the American people do not support their agenda, but they're not going to walk away from it.
U.S. Senate candidate from North Carolina and former RNC chair Michael Watley. Great talking to you this morning. Thank you. Tonight, President Trump will be delivering the first State of the Union address of his second term. Voters, of course, listening closely for his message on the economy, affordability, foreign policy, and national security. Joining us now with a preview of where voters stand on these key issues is Scott Rasmussen, president of RMG Research. Good morning to you, sir. Before we get into the numbers, what do you hope to hear from the president tonight? And based on what voters are telling you, what are the must-hit themes in his speech?
Well, let's start with the basics, Jan. Only 42% of voters, even though the president is giving a State of the Union address tonight, only 10% are planning to watch. I think one of the issues is the president is so much of a presence in our media cycle that this isn't all that unusual. Having said that, voters are going to be looking, especially those who live in the political bubble, for a plan to make the economy better. Not for a statement that it is better, but a plan to make it better. And perhaps, secondly, President Trump has a higher capacity for chaos than just about anybody. Yeah. Voters are a little tired of it. Maybe they're looking for a way to dial down the chaos a bit.
Let's take a look, speaking of the economy, at how voters are feeling about their own finances. 28% believe they're getting better, 29% believe they're getting worse. That's equal there. However, I thought this number was very telling, Scott. 41% say their finances are good or excellent. So what does that tell you about the mood of the country, and what does the president need to say to reassure voters who aren't feeling this relief that, look, it is getting better? We are turning a corner. What is he going to do?
Well, the first thing we need to do is acknowledge how far we've come. 28% saying their finances are better, 29% worse. Those aren't great numbers, but just before President Trump won the election in 2024, the numbers were much, much worse. Only 25% said better, 41% worse. The trend in these numbers, this is the most important determinant of how the midterms are going to turn out. So the people want to hear something that says there's relief coming down the road. But ultimately, what really matters is how do people actually feel about their personal finances this summer? No matter what the president says, if they're not feeling it, it doesn't matter.
So it's all about the closer we get. People's memories are short, as we know. But again, 41% did say they felt their finances were good or excellent, which I thought was very, very telling. Another poll digs into how stretched Americans feel right now. In fact, household budget pressure when it comes to this. 48% says all their money goes to living expenses. 46% say they can set aside money for savings. Nearly half of voters say every dollar is going toward basic living expenses. How much of tonight's speech needs to focus squarely on affordability and the cost of living?
Oh, this has to be the message. The fact that half of Americans live paycheck to paycheck is the reason that things like gas prices and grocery prices and the basics matter so much. I mean, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, you have only a limited amount of disposable income each week. Gas prices go up, you have less to spend on groceries. Grocery prices go up, you have less to spend on gas. At some point, when those prices go down, you begin to feel a little relief. That's when you begin to feel better. So this is the reason those economic considerations are so important.
And now let's zoom out to the broader economy. Let's talk about how voters rate the economy at this point. 31% say good or excellent. 30% say poor. 52% of Republicans say that they would rate the economy as good or excellent. So only about a third rate the economy positively, though Republicans are far more upbeat, Scott, which is not surprising. How does the president bridge that perception gap and convince independents and maybe even swing voters that the economy is truly on the right track?
Well, again, the trend is moving in that direction. Another measure that we have, only 30% of voters now say the U.S. economy is in a recession. That's way down from before the president was elected. It's way down from a month or two ago. So the trend is moving in that direction. But I think there just needs to be a focus. First of all, if you're the president, you want to do two things. You want to have a plan that says we're making it better right now. We're not telling you it's great. The second thing you want to do is if people begin to feel better about those numbers, you want to absolutely connect your policies to them. The reason you're feeling better about your finances is X, Y, or Z. In this case, it might be the tax cuts. If you're somebody who earns a lot of money on tips, you're going to be getting a bigger refund than you would have before. You're going to have to connect the dots.
How many people already have their minds made up? And this speech will have little bearing on how they feel about the president or how they feel about what's happening in America.
Jan, 85% of voters already know who they're going to vote for in 2028. They're either going to vote Republican or Democrat. It is these swing voters who matter. They're the ones who are disappointed with both parties. They're not really inclined to believe political leaders. They want to see results. We talk about that as a small number, but if the number of people who believe that their finances are getting better go up 5 or 10 points, it's huge.
Yeah, you're right about that.
Let me put it in perspective for you. In 1983, I'm old enough to remember that. You're obviously not. But in 1983, the polls showed that Walter Mondale was going to beat Ronald Reagan for re-election. Ronald Reagan won 49 states. What happened? it was morning in America. We had the fastest economic growth that we'd had since World War II. The economy changing, the perceptions of the economy changing can change the mood politically in ways most people can't imagine.
Yeah, and in this case, it could happen right before the election or on election day. Scott Rasmussen,
Right.
president of RMG Research. Always great to talk to you, sir. Have a good one.
President Trump is getting ready to deliver his first State of the Union address during his second term. This comes after a whirlwind of a first year back in office packed with tariffs, deportations, peace agreements, and more. Let's go to Emma Withrow from the Fact Check team. A lot that happened in the past year when you think about it, really, Emma. And I'm sure as we preview the State of the Union, immigration is going to come up.
Absolutely. Yeah, we can expect President Trump to really lean heavily into his actions when it comes to, like you said, immigration, border security, economic nationalism with those tariffs, and also foreign policy strength, all big themes that have really defined the first year of his second term. And that'll likely shape, the political fight that is going to come as we head into the midterms. The White House released a preview State of the Union address video. You can see it there playing on your screen on their website, and that focuses on Trump's efforts when it comes to restoring law and order. So we can also expect that to be a pretty large theme tomorrow night.
As we look back at the history of the State of the Union, it's really fascinating because it's a cornerstone for American presidents. It's a tradition, a progress report for the White House. Break down the history of it all.
Really interesting history that I dug into today. So the idea of the State of the Union actually dates back all the way back to our country's inception in the Constitution. So in Article 2, Section 3, it says the president must, from time to time, inform Congress about the state of the country and recommend policies. But it wasn't originally required to be done yearly or even necessarily be this big speech. Though George Washington, he gave the very first State of the Union address to Congress in 1790, and it was done in New York, which was the capital at the time, and it was a large speech. That model, though, wasn't set in stone. So fast forward to Thomas Jefferson. He felt like the speech was a little bit too similar to an address that they might have gotten from the king. So he switched it up and he wrote a letter to Congress. And then that format actually continued on for about 100 years. So everybody did these letters until Woodrow Wilson showed up in 1913. He revived the speech format to push his legislative agenda a little bit more formally and directly. And that's when it really started to look like the modern political event that we know today that everybody wants to tune into.
All right, Emma, a good review. And a little later on, Morgan Stevens will join us to dig into the bombshell moments of past State of the Union addresses and how the American people feel about them. From standing ovations to stunning showdowns, the State of the Union address has produced moments that live beyond the congressional walls. Let's go to Morgan Stevens from the Fact Check team. And of course, as we have watched, it's not only the president where the cameras turn their attention to. What sticks out to you?
Dee Dee, I mean, the most recent one that comes to mind is that now infamous moment in 2020 when former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi ripped up Donald Trump's speech. But it's far from the only one. Joe Biden got booed on every State of the Union by GOP House members and heckled by Marjorie Taylor Greene. And now rewind 15 years and we have Barack Obama getting interrupted by Congressman Joe Wilson yelling, "You lie," while the president spoke about his immigration policy. Back then, pundits called Wilson's outburst an extraordinary breach of decorum. And even further back in 1982, Ronald Reagan began the tradition of seating a guest with lawmakers when he brought government employee Lenny Skutnik, who rescued a plane crash victim after a plane landed in the Potomac River.
So it has been filled with political theater as well, as we know. I'm curious, what do the viewership numbers look like today?
Well, viewership has declined over the decades. In the 90s and the early 2000s, Nielsen data shows that the State of the Union by Presidents, Bill Clinton, and we have George W. Bush, they routinely drew 40 to 60 million viewers. In recent years, though, that number has generally fallen to 25 to 35 million.
And is this decline tied to how people watch, viewer habits? What does the data show?
Right, and it's really difficult to say. I mean, if it's because maybe it's a loss of interest or if people are just really watching differently now. We know that traditional broadcast media and cable news viewership has splintered because they're tuning into, YouTube or streaming or even social media.
Yeah, exactly. To your point, how people watch is evolving as well. Morgan, thank you. And for more on this Fact Check Team topic, including links to their sources, scan that QR code or visit thenationaldesk.com.
President Trump will deliver his first State of the Union address of his second term to a joint session of Congress next week. He's expected to talk about the economic recovery, where new numbers do show inflation easing, wages rising, and more Americans now heading back to work. Joining us now to discuss this and more is the Special Assistant to the President and Senior White House Deputy Press Secretary, Kush Desai. Good morning to you, sir. Great to see you.
Morning. Thanks for having me on.
We're already seeing some Democratic lawmakers who are planning to boycott and hold their own left-wing rally, and other Democratic lawmakers who are plotting a staged walkout and perhaps create a spectacle. What is your message to those Democratic members of Congress this morning?
It's not particularly surprising that Democrats are going to boycott and not listen to what the president's address. I think you're going to hear a lot about what the president has done over the past year to deliver real economic relief for the American people. You just saw in the last couple of weeks a slew of new economic data, from the Dow Jones Industrial Average hitting 50,000 to inflation cooling to a jobs report showing 170,000 private sector jobs being added. So it's no surprise that Democrats don't want to hear this good news and don't want to hear about what the president continues to focus on doing to deliver even more relief for the American people.
We know the economy is going to be a central theme, as you mentioned. The numbers tell the story. We're looking at 2.4% year-over-year CPI, down from the 3% rate the administration inherited, while private sector wages are outpacing inflation at this point by nearly $1,400 annually. So what's driving that turnaround, and how significant is this moment, Kush, for working families?
Sure. Look, it absolutely is significant. I mean, again, you pointed out how real wages for the past year are up $1,400. That means roughly half of the $3,000 or so in real wages that Americans lost during the Biden era has been recouped in record time here in just 1 year. Obviously, that means there's still much more work to go, but we're very confident that as the president's policies continue taking effect, as our rapid deregulation, as our historic tax cuts, as our most favored nation drug pricing deals continue taking effect, we're going to see even further relief for the American people. And we're going to see that last $1,600 that Americans lost during Biden be recouped, and then beyond that.
Also, too, we are seeing this huge fall of energy prices. I mean, we're seeing year-over-year energy costs coming down. Gas is down tremendously, 7.5%. This is all despite a spike, as we know, in natural gas during the unusually cold January we just had really across the country. So how much of this is policy versus global market forces?
It's almost entirely driven by policy. Look, the president had a very clear campaign pledge to drill, baby, drill. And that's what this administration has focused on doing since day one, when the president signed a slew of executive orders to slash regulations and slash burdensome red tape that the previous Biden administration had put in place on the oil and gas and coal industries. The fact that we've seen natural gas and oil production hit all-time highs under this president in the last year are indicative of how this agenda is really shoring up energy affordability for American families and businesses.
Yeah, and on the jobs front, we did see January blew past expectations, went up with 172,000 new private sector jobs. Unemployment also ticked down to 4.3%. So we've got 42,000 fewer government jobs. And yet, prime age labor force participation right now at its highest level since 2001. So this is really, the kind of labor market restructuring the president envisioned, growing the private sector while shrinking Washington and draining the swamp. The administration is calling this a golden age. What should Americans be watching next to reassure them that this momentum is here to stay?
Absolutely. Look, you mentioned very clearly that this is about, our focus is on private sector job growth. That is real, that is sustainable job growth that can actually lead to real long-term economic growth. The Biden administration, for instance, was focused on kind of juking the stats by adding government jobs instead of relying on real private sector growth. And I think what should encourage Americans looking forward is the trillions in investments that the president has secured from foreign countries and from industry leaders, from, chip makers like TSMC to automakers all around the world to pharmaceutical companies. And as those investments materialize, which was what we're seeing in the data, you saw robust specialty construction job growth, meaning new factories that are being built and coming on the line. As we see those investments continue materializing, we're going to see even more robust private sector job growth in the coming weeks and months here.
All right. So looking forward to the president's speech next Tuesday, the address. Tuesday night, Special Assistant to the President, Senior White House Deputy Press Secretary Kush Desai. We appreciate you joining us this morning. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on.